Today I'm going to be talking about the new Pastel Umbra collection from Terra Moons Cosmetics, and I'm going to be doing my usual detailed swatches where I will swatch out every single shimmer along with a detailed description. Then I'll do a look using these eyeshadows, and I will talk you through how everything applies, and at the end of the video I will give you my first thoughts and impressions on this collection. Also, hi, my name is Nupur and I love indie makeup and all things color and sparkle, and I would really appreciate it if you gave this video a like and considered subscribing if you aren't already subscribed. Let me give you some launch details really quickly. These eyeshadows are launching on Friday, March 14th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Before we get into the swatches, I just want to mention that I did receive this collection in PR and to do some paid content for the brand, so I just want to make that clear. I also have an affiliate code with the brand, Nupur15, which will help you save on your order, and this means that I will get a small commission if you use my code, so thank you so much if you use it. That being said, I always like to mention that I don't want you to feel pressured to purchase this collection. I just want to give you as much information as possible about the eyeshadows. So now that that's out of the way, let's get into it. Here are all the shadows up close. There are 7 mattes and 5 shimmers in this collection. I'm not sure how much pricing is, but I will update the description box once I know. Here are all the mattes together. The matte formula is the recent formula we've been seeing from Terra Moons. It is very soft and powdery with a lot of kick up in the pan. This makes the shadows very pigmented, yet easy to blend. Rising Moon has a baby blue base with sparkles that shift a soft pink to gold to green, but there is also a silvery quality to it. It has a very small particle size and is super smooth. It is not the most sparkly shade in the collection, but still sparkly considering the texture. Starbirth has a pigmented pastel purple base with sparkles that shift pinky orange to yellow to green. There is a slightly dimensional quality to this shade. This also has a very small particle size and is super smooth, meaning it has the same level of sparkle as the previous shade. Irondale has a semi-sheer pastel pink base with sparkles that shift from green to blue. The sparkles really stand out against the base but don't really have much texture. They have a small particle size, just a tiny step up from the previous shades, but this shadow is definitely much more sparkly than those. The shadow applies smoothly. Lunar Cycle has a semi-sheer dusty purple base with sparkles that shift pink, orange, yellow, and chartreuse at the sharpest angle. It also has contrasting sparkles mixed in that shift green to blue. The shadow has a texture to it, but is not flaky. The texture also smooths out easily. It is super sparkly and shiny. Earthshine has a sheer minty green base with sparkles that shift green to purpley pink. The shadow has a medium particle size and a little texture, but smooths out easily. It's also a little loosely pressed and on the drier side. It is very sparkly and shears out to a scattered, twinkly effect. So I have a bit of a concept for this look. I'm going to try at least because Terra Moons mentioned that this collection is named the Pastel Umbra collection. Pastels for spring, of course, but the Umbra is inspired by, it's something that happens during a lunar eclipse, which this collection is launching on Friday the 14th, which is when a lunar eclipse is happening, a blood moon specifically. And I'm reading off my phone now. They say that during an eclipse, the first shadow cast is called the Umbra, which is why this collection is inspired by the eclipse, so I wanted to do a look inspired by that too. So the reason that I was saying that I want to try creating a look inspired by the eclipse and the blood moon is because in this collection there are actually no reds to, mimic that blood moon, but I'm thinking that I want to make it more just based on like the moon itself and things like that. So the gray for the moon and the purple for, the deep night sky. And then I will probably end up using this shimmer here because it's the closest thing to red that we have. It's more pinky, but let's see if I can make it work. So I'm going to dip into the gray shade first. So I just wanted to show you after swirling my brush in the pan a few times, there's quite a bit of kick up. So Terra Moons mattes are quite powdery, which I don't mind. They're very, very pigmented and super easy to blend, but I know that some people don't like a lot of kick up, so I just wanted to show that. Now that I look a little weird with pigment only on one eye, I just want to mention really quickly, in case you're new to my channel, the way that I do my tutorials is I'm going to be showing you the application portion on this eye, but I'll already have the step that I'm currently doing completed on this eye. That way you can see as I'm building what the end goal is. Also, since these mattes are quite powdery, I always like to tap them off really well before I start. So I'm going to start by fluffing this gray shade all over my lid. I'm just doing it very roughly. This doesn't have to be very neat because we're going to be adding more stuff on top of it. I dipped my brush back in, tapped it off, and I'm going to go into the crease and start building more of this gray shade over there as well. This shadow is going pretty much everywhere on the lid, and then we're going to build other shades over it. Just adding more pigment in between the crease and my lid where I didn't quite get it covered. And I'm also taking the shadow on the outer corner. I really meant everywhere, including the lower lash line. I'm fluffing it all the way from the outer edge towards the inner edge. This gray did build and blend really well, and it is on the more pastel side, if grays can even be pastel, but it still built and blended really well, especially considering I don't have a brightening, like white primer on underneath like I sometimes need to do with pastels. And you know how some pastels have a formula where it's more like pack it on and blend out the edges? That was not the case with this shade. It was very easy to build slowly the way I like to. Now that I have this very bright gray on, I need to start building some depth because I love my depth, and also what is an eclipse without any shadow? So I'm going to dip into this deep purple matte next. And I'm going to start putting this purple shade all over my lid, really starting, or rather focusing it towards my lash line first, and then very, very carefully taking it upwards. I don't want it to actually go into the crease at all. Still building, and as I get to the crease, I'm going to stop. I'm actually not going to try to blend it into the crease with this brush. I'm actually going to switch to a different brush. So I'm switching to this brush, and this is from Fantasy Cosmetica. It's the E02 brush, but it doesn't have to be this exact one. All I really look for is something that's a blending brush that's very, very small. So in comparison to that first brush, you can see it's a lot tinier and comes to more of a point at the tip. And with this brush, I'm going to tap into the purple shade again very lightly, and then very slowly and very carefully start taking this up towards the crease. But I'm frequently looking up into the mirror to make sure that it's not going past the crease. And then I'm going to start bringing it inwards a little bit, doing the same thing on the outer corner. And here I am actually getting it a bit past my lid area because this is where I like to put depth. And now I'm just going over and making sure that the pigment is there in like an even layer. Even though I am going to cover this up with a shimmer, I just wanted a nice base down. I'm taking that first brush that I used for the gray with the tiniest dip of powder, and I'm going to go over the two shades to make sure that the blend is seamless. But I'm not going to worry too much because, like I said, we are covering this up with shimmer, so it doesn't need to be super, super precise. And then I took more of that purple on this tiny, tiny brush, and I'm going to run it on my lower lash line, focusing it here on the outer edge, and then slowly running whatever's left on the brush inwards. I'm going to apply some Fair & Pixie Epoxy off camera, and then I will be back to do the shimmer on this eye. But you already have a sneak peek of what I'm going to do. I'm keeping my eye closed as it's drying, but I'm going to dip into this shimmer here, Lunar Cycle. And I'm putting the shimmer pretty much all over the lid, getting the bulk of it on with my finger first. Then I took more on this brush, and that is going to... I'm going to use that to get the corners of my eye. Then I also like to use the brush to feather the shimmer up towards the crease because I only want the shimmer to be super opaque and intense where the purple is, and as the purple starts fading into the gray, I just want to tap on a bit of shimmer. I am getting a little bit of fallout as I apply it, which doesn't bother me that much, and especially because the shadow has a little bit of texture to it, but it smoothed out pretty easily on my lid. Like you can see there isn't a ton of texture on the lid itself. It's just that the shadow does have, you know, a dimensional quality to it, which usually comes with a little bit of texture. So this was kind of a fail in terms of my concept because this shimmer is coming out a lot more pinky than red, and it's very much not giving blood moon makeup like I wanted it to. But I mean, I was just, you know, limiting myself to working with just these colors. I think if I wanted to do actual blood moon makeup, I would use an actually red shimmer on my lid. But it's still really pretty, and I like the combination of this shimmer over that deep purple base. I think it really amplified the shimmer and made it pop a lot. And since I'm doing away with the blood moon concept, I'm going to go in with this minty green shimmer next. This is also somewhat of a textured shadow, and since I'm not using this one with a tacky primer, I'm going to work in very thin layers for this. But this is going to go, as you would expect, in my inner corner, on this inner part of my lower lash line, and finally up through the swoop. Can you see how reflective and vibrant this minty green is in the inner swoop? I feel like this angle always shows off the inner swoop shimmer the best, even if it's not the most flattering. I did my mascara, cheeks, and lips off camera, and here's the final look. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, even though it very much is not blood moon makeup in the slightest. It's more of like a spring pastel-y look, but I'm pretty happy with that. The main shimmer that I have on my lid, Lunar Cycle, it's so, so beautiful. Definitely my favorite shimmer in the collection, and I love the way it looks. Also, I don't think I actually talked about how the purple matte performed in the application, but it built up really, really well, especially considering that I was putting it over, you know, the gray matte. It wasn't going on straight onto primer. So considering that, I feel like it built up really well to a good depth level, and it wasn't that difficult to blend out, which with dark purples like this, it can be difficult. And of course, it didn't reach the depth level that it is in the pan. You know, when in a swatch, it's a lot darker than what it applied on the eyes, but that was intentional. I wanted it to mix in with the grayish bluish matte. And then here's the eyeshadow up close so that you can see all of that texture and the sparkle and everything. But I do want to make a quick note that I've had this eyeshadow on for 4 to 5 hours now, and my base makeup for probably closer to 6 hours. So if everything looks, you know, not that pristine, that's why. Before we get into my thoughts on this collection, I want to emphasize, as always, that this is not a review. I only used 4 of the single shadows, and I need to use the rest of them, and also just use them a lot more before I can give you a full and proper review. So first off, these are single shadows and not a palette, so I don't really feel like I can talk about the color story as a whole, but in terms of the choices for the shades in this collection, at least with the mattes, I feel like this is a very interesting collection because you have your lighter, brighter, more pastel-y shades that are very spring-like, but then you also have this matte black and a gray, which even though this is pastel-y, at least on my skin tone, it's an interesting choice for a spring collection. I love it, but it's just interesting, you know, it's not your typical. And then there's also this dark purple matte over here, which I'm curious why they didn't go for a pastel purple matte just to match the other colorful pastels. Like in my head, it makes sense that there's a light gray and a black for like neutral shades, but then why is the purple dark and matte? But then, as someone who is not the biggest fan of pastels, I do really appreciate there being a colorful deepening up option because I'm also not the biggest fan of black matte. So that's why I was thrilled to like see this purple, and I obviously used it in my look today to add some depth because I don't enjoy super light, bright pastel-y looks on me on their own. I feel like I need some depth to add contrast to make it go with my complexion. I also do think if they were going to choose one color to make deeper as a matte, like a colorful shade, purple makes a lot of sense because it would go with the blue, it goes with the pink, it even goes with the green to a certain extent, but I feel like the only matte that it would be difficult to blend into is this yellow over here. Also, to talk about the pastels for a minute, I do appreciate that these are not super white-based pastels because those are the pastels that I dislike the most because I feel like they usually blend into nothing on my skin tone and they don't really pop. I always have to pack them on over a white base to make them stand out. And I like that all of these are not super white-based pastels. Like these are pastels that I can actually see myself using, although I would probably pair them with some deeper shades. The one thing that I will say about the color story is that it would have been really cool for there to be a red shimmer in this collection because when I was just researching Lunar Eclipse stuff, and I learned that this Friday's Lunar Eclipse is going to be a blood moon, and I just think that would have been such a cool, unique type of spring collection for Terra Moons, especially because they are such a space-themed brand. I don't know, something to consider. Maybe they could do something like that in the future. I won't talk too much about the matte formula since I already talked about that in the swatch section, but I do enjoy Terra Moon's matte formula. I think it's really easy to work with. Even though it's powdery and dusty, they're very pigmented, very easy to blend, and I don't really have any complaints with them. I'm also glad that these are not the super hard-pressed Terra Moon's matte formula because I feel like we've seen 2 formulas from them in the past year or so, and I much prefer the one that's like this, that's loosely pressed and more powdery than the dry one or the hard pressed one, because I feel like that one is just slightly more difficult for me to work with for some reason. Let's talk about the shimmers next, and this is the most matte heavy collection that I've seen from Terra Moons of late. It's very interesting for them because they're kind of known for their shimmer single shadows. I do think that all of the shimmers in this collection match the tones of the mattes really well, and they're perfect for spring. You have a lot of lighter, more ethereal, pastel-y shimmers that fits in with the theming of the collection really well. I am really happy to see Terra Moons going back and doing more like really smooth shimmers. Then you have a couple more textured shimmers, and then this one is kind of in between the two in terms of texture. So I know for a while there they were making more textured and flaky shadows, and I'm just glad to see that they're continuing now to make shadows of all different kinds of textures depending on what your preferences are. My two favorite shimmers in this collection are the two that I used today. So Lunar Cycle, which is all over my lid, and Earth Shine, which is in the inner corner and swoop. They are the most sparkly shades in this collection. I mean, this one is pretty sparkly too, but I think due to the texture of these and the way that they are a bit more, I don't want to say loosely pressed, but the way that the sparkles translate on your eyes, they're so reflective and so sparkly. I also really like this shade. It's such an interesting tone because it's pastel-y and purple, but at the same time, I feel like this is the type of pastel, sorry for flipping you off, but this is the type of pastel that I would be comfortable wearing. I think like all over the lid with just, even this pink matte in the crease would be such a pretty look. But that's it for this video. If you have any questions about the collection that I didn't talk through, please let me know down in the comments below and I will definitely get back to you. Thank you so much for watching, and please don't forget to give this video a like before you go, and I will see you in the next one. Bye! These nails are the real Blood Moon makeup, and I want these on my eyes!